of all the weird things that I want to use. And thank you. Also, shout outs to the Zootown Arts Community Center for allowing me to use their amazing print shop, and also shout out to the Home Resource and Giving Arts to Missoula, as I sourced a lot of my materials from there. Today I will be sort of walking you through my journey of what led me to here, doing a project at the Montana Natural History Center, starting with some background about me as an artist and my inspirations, and then moving into one of my projects from before I was here in Montana, and then ending with my current project, which I will say I'm still in the middle of working on, so it's a little, there's going to be a little more kind of questions than answers with that project. So I first became interested in using animals and nature as a subject matter really early on in my life. I was the type of kid who was always drawing animals. I loved, some of you might know the children's book illustrator Jan Brett. And she's known for including motifs that relate to the story in the borders of her images, which we'll come back to later, but hugely influential for me. As well as I attended Audubon Society nature camp when I was a kid, and I was constantly looking at the taxidermy there. I was a little bit scared of it when I was a kid, but I was introduced to a lot of animals in nature there. So when I went to college in Boston, I was drawing so many birds that my teachers really pushed me to visit the Harvard Natural History Museum in Boston. And I would go there and I would draw from observation. And I loved being in there. And I also was looking at a lot of images by the artist John James Audubon, who, coming from like the upbringing that I had in the Audubon Society, and then also being faced with the types of things that I was seeing in natural history museums, this was kind of my understanding of what a drawing of a bird looks like. And it wasn't until later that I started to question that. So I saw, a little bit later on, I saw this show of Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I started to think about what was really different between these images and what John James Audubon was doing in terms of their scientific validity or usefulness. I think that the canon that I grew up with was very much rooted in like there's illustration that's scientific and there's illustration that's art. And this was put in the category of art, and the other one was Audubon was put in the category of science, and I didn't understand why that was. I could see that Hokusai was being just as observant about the details of the birds as Audubon was, and also I could tell that Hokusai was probably drawing from birds who are actually alive, whereas John James Audubon was killing the birds, propping them up, and then drawing them from dead specimens, so oftentimes their configurations were all out of sorts. So this led me on this journey that I'm still continuing with, like trying to understand a different framework from the one that I grew up with around natural history, art, and representations of animals and plants. So when I started doing a deeper dive into some of those names that might have gotten a little bit more written out of natural history, I learned that the children's book illustrator Beatrix Potter used to also be a naturalist illustrator. And these are her drawings from when she was a teenager, or maybe in her early 20s. You can see that's a picture of her there on the top right, with there's a taxidermy piece behind her. glove. So she was totally fascinated with all the same things that I'm also fascinated with, looking at bugs and insects and drawing them. But in the Victorian society that she was in, she was not able to pursue this as a career. So her option was to be a children's book illustrator, and that's how we know her for Tales of Peter Rabbit. This, a little out of order, but this is also at the Boston Harvard Museum of Natural History. It's the Glass Flowers exhibition. These flowers, they're all made entirely out of glass and maybe some metal, but they are so completely lifelike. And when I saw these when I first went there, they were everything to me. So just touching on that, because that will come back in your project as well. And then more recently, I'm super, super influenced by Mary Shelley, as she was also a naturalist. She was really interested in taxidermy and researching the body and how things work. And that fed in a lot to her conceptualization of, the book Frankenstein. But also thinking about Mary Shelley and how her idea of what a monster is really something where the monster is a reflection of Dr. Frankenstein himself, if you know the story. He created this monster, and then the monster kind of comes back to haunt him. And I think that as an artist and as a person in the world, something that I think a lot about is, what am I repulsed by, and what does that say about me? Or what are other people repulsed by, and what does it say about them? So this idea of objection. So I should probably be timing this. Lastly, and most recently, when I went to grad school, I really wanted to understand how I could connect some of the more contemporary, ecological issues that are going on with my work, so that I could really have it be more critically engaged with some important conversations that are happening right now in this climate crisis that we're in. So I started learning about ways of using materials that will decompose rather than remain forever, like plastics, or ways of sourcing materials that already exist in the world and reusing them. So I started to think about sort of the ethics of the materials that I wanted to use. I'll come back to this. And I started actually using animal parts in my work, and part of the reason was I wanted to challenge people's ethical, I wanted to try to force people to locate themselves somewhere on this spectrum between animal cruelty and things that harm the environment because of their long-term impact on the environment. So something like dumping glitter down the drain versus killing a squirrel or beaver. And my ambition here wasn't to provoke or to agitate people, but just these are all byproducts of fur industry and basically fur garment industry that I order by the pound. And I wanted to kind of use that sort of material that's sort of gross and abject to try to make people again question, am I repulsed by this, and is it more repulsive than acrylic paint in terms of what it's actually doing to the environment? These are the type of questions that I wanted to ask. Because this will break down eventually, and plastic won't. So I started using these materials. I also gathered horsehair and feathers, and I started crafting these plants entirely out of animal parts and just some adhesive. So there's a bird foot and feathers, and this one has bones and feathers and horsehair wrapped around wire. This one is all cowhide. This one's a little harder to see, but fur and horsehair. And then I photographed these and basically made them into etchings. And so part of etchings were in the 19th and early 20th century the main mode of communication of visual information, right? So I really like this idea that as a printmaker I could use the mode of communication of the time that I am trying to bring into the conversation using contemporary processes. So I'm using a photo-based process, but I'm printing them on copper plates with a press. So this was, I called this my Monsters series, and I created a series of etchings with all of these botanical images. There is just some slight hand-drawn line work that is a little hard to see in the images, but I always like to have a little bit of my hand come back into the images so you can see like there's those thicker, darker, reddish lines are all hand-drawn into the plate. So this is very blurry, but I wanted to show what I could of my printing process. So this is what it looks like when I'm printing these works. And then this is like while I'm editioning them. So they're all in editions of, I'm going to count 7. I think there were 7 prints of 7 images. And then I wanted to do more with these, right? So I thought about how can I install these in a way that adds more context and tells the viewer the type of context that I want them to view the work in. Because I think that the print alone is beautiful, but it was becoming too much of, people were taking it at face value. That's like, oh, what a beautiful image of a flower or something, and not taking that time to really understand like all of the things that I'm thinking about. So I wanted to add more context. So I created this wallpaper called Watch Botanical Debauchery, and I played around with all of the images of like Mary Shelley and Maria Sophia Marian, who's another earlier 1600s female naturalist. Some sort of distorted like Audubon images. Yeah, so just kind of like a mess of all these different things that I'm thinking about. And then installing the work in this sort of, I wanted it to feel like some kind of a house from the 1800s that had been maintained by an institution. So very clean, crisp white molding on the top and bottom, full wallpaper installed in the bricks. Okay, so now to my time here at the Montana Natural History Center. After that project, I wanted to think about, I was reading a lot of Gothic literature at the time, and then more recently I've been reading a lot of science fiction, and I was thinking about how do I make work that feels like science fiction to me. And I also was thinking a lot about animals and animals in art. And I thought about, okay, well, what's the first image that I saw of animals? And I think that it was probably something like this. It was probably, I'm Jewish, I went to Jewish religious school, and we learned about Noah's Ark, right? So I wanted to play with this idea of duality, the animals being in pairs, but I also wanted to talk about something that scares me a lot, which is the sea levels are rising, and it's a very real thing. So I was thinking about how can I make these things float? What would my Noah's Ark look like? And I was thinking about life preservers. I said they all need to float, as life preservers do. I also was thinking a lot about these medieval illuminated manuscripts and the idea of a bestiary. These aren't from a bestiary, and I need to look. I've been trying to track down this book. was really, really inspired by, again, like the Jan Brett idea of these motifs happening in the borders that are then relating to the inside content of the work. And I was also really captivated by this idea of blue. This color royal blue was often used to depict the Virgin Mary because it was a very expensive color to use at the time because it doesn't occur much in nature. For the same reason, because it doesn't occur much in nature, it's often used as a backdrop on things like Antiques Roadshow, because when you have things that are in a lot of neutral colors, such as a violin or someone's skin tone or an alligator case, etc., it stands out really well against that royal blue background. And I also like blue because what else does it represent? Well, water. So I knew coming in, I knew bestiary, Noah's Ark, and the color blue, and I kind of used that as my framework. I also was I'm really curious about depictions of animals that I just see around everywhere. So I've just been going around Missoula, like taking pictures of things in thrift stores. I also, we got to visit the Zoological Museum, which was awesome. And while I didn't use these samples in my work, I became really interested in the idea of like, how are these natural materials documented, archived, preserved? Because thinking about a Noah's Ark is also like thinking about a time capsule. And you know, I want to interrogate the idea of what do we want to bring with us into the future, right? Yep. So here's some of the specimens that I used. This was my photo setup. Just like it was a very, very simple blue background because I wanted to have that really striking, almost floating in space kind of feeling with the work. So this is sort of my process of making my flotation devices. So first the specimens are pulled, then I set up my photo shoot, then I bring it into Photoshop and do a little editing. I'm not changing, I'm basically just editing to make it look like how it looked in real life, right? So I'm not doing a lot of like cutting and pasting, just making sure that the prints reflect what I'm looking at in real life and that the color blue is exactly how I want it to be, etc. So this is like the printing and proofing process, checking to see if he likes it. I really like it. And then it became after I have my image made and ready, it becomes a sculpture project. So I was very lucky to find these life preservers at Home Resource in this foam at GAM, and I started just playing around with these materials and seeing what I could do with them. If anyone ever wanted to know what's inside of a life preserver, it's this. More just looking at weird materials. And then I started drawing these border motifs with pen on paper. These then get translated for screen print, but I'll just talk about making this image a little bit for a minute. So you can see like these are all fragments of representations of animals and plants that I collected. And then I positioned them in a way to make them look like an illuminated manuscript border. So then I get to take them to the ZAC and I get to play around with printmaking onto these objects. So this is testing a layer. I didn't end up liking that color, so the final image just doesn't look like that. More process photos of assembling these materials, and then I did also sew together cases from the life preservers with my own proprietary branding and proprietary warning labels. sculptures.
Hold
I
it up
can
higher.
work them as- or maybe we can work on.
Can you have the light? Yeah, that's good.
Oh, yeah, I can get one on.
That's good.
So I invite everyone to come up and take a closer look at them at some point. But that's, I don't know, I can talk for longer.